Back then it meant a lot to me because, like I was like very nervous, because I didn't want the on the production.
Oh, no, just do it for me as this says you go.
That's so silly.
All right, squeeze.
Brian Wilson is dead. The news was confirmed on the morning of June 11, 2025, ending the life of a musical genius who once defined an era.
News: Beach Boys legend Brian Wilson has passed away. We just got this news moments ago. The news was confirmed.
The media called it a great loss for American culture. Artists around the world paid tribute. Fans were outraged. But Mike Love, who has been with Brian since the beginning of the Beach Boys, has been completely silent.
When I say he, I mean Brian. And he would go to Studio 3 at Western Recorders on Sunset Boulevard.
For nearly 3 decades, he has not said a word. Through controversy, litigation, and discord. It wasn't until 26 hours later, at age 84, that Mike Love finally spoke. And what he said was unlike anything anyone had heard from him before. In 1961, Mike Love and Brian Wilson laid the foundation for the Beach Boys, one of the most influential groups in American history. They were cousins who grew up together in Hawthorne, California, steeped in 3-part harmony, beach dreams, and keen commercial instincts. But behind the radio hits was a decades-long rivalry fueled by differences in musical vision, copyright disputes, and personal wounds that never fully healed. At first, the two worked well together. Brian took on the role of producer and composer, while Mike focused on writing and performing. Songs like Surfin' USA, I Get Around, and Fun all bore the hallmarks of the duo.
We always take my car 'cause it's never been beat and we've never met. Well, where is the standard cushy walks, but surprise like the new one.
But by 1966, when Brian decided to move into a more complex and ambitious musical direction with Pet Sounds, tensions began to build. The album was critically acclaimed, but Mike saw it as a departure from what the public wanted. His now attributed "Don't Mess with the Formula" became a symbol of the internal conflict, although Love later denied ever being so vehemently opposed to Pet Sounds. As Brian began work on Smile, a haunting, unfinished work that would last for decades, Mike grew increasingly concerned, not only about Brian's musical direction, but also about his own mental state, which was deteriorating. The tension reached its peak in the 1990s. Mike Love sued Brian Wilson to reclaim the copyright to 35 songs that he claimed he had written but had not been credited for, because Brian's father, Murray Wilson, had left him out of the songwriting credits. The court ruled in favor of Mike, ordering Wilson to pay $13 million in damages. Although Love was legally recognized, he was widely criticized by fans and the media. Many saw this as an act of betrayal, causing an irreparable rift with Brian. From that point on, the relationship between the two men almost fell into a state of frost. In 1998, Brian's brother, and a rare neutral in the band, Carl Wilson, died of cancer. This marked the turning point when the Beach Boys went in 2 distinct directions. Mike Love, with the legal rights to the band name, continued to tour and run his own version of the band. Meanwhile, Brian began working independently, collaborating with Al Jardine, David Marks, and others. The ownership of the name The Beach Boys became a long-standing controversy among fans, with many believing that the group had split permanently. In 2012, to celebrate the band's 50th anniversary, Brian Wilson and Mike Love reunited for a special tour, complete with all surviving members. The album That's Why God Made the Radio was released as a symbol of reconciliation. But the reconciliation did not last. Shortly after the tour ended, Love announced that he would continue touring with his group without Brian, Al Jardine, and David Marks. Once again, he was criticized for firing Brian shortly after they had achieved success together again. Love denied the accusations, claiming that the decision had been agreed upon in advance and that continuing the shows was a contractual obligation. Nevertheless, the feeling of being left out still lingers with Brian and his supporters. The tension between the two continued into the 2020s. In 2020, Mike Love performed at a fundraiser for Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Brian Wilson and Al Jardine immediately released a statement, stating that they had nothing to do with the event and did not agree with the band's name being associated with any political agenda. The split was not only artistic, but also social, further deepening the gap between Love and Wilson. In the eyes of much of the public, Brian became a symbol of damaged creativity, while Mike was seen as a representative of the pragmatic, commercial, and even offensive side. By 2024, belated signs of reconciliation began to emerge. In a rare interview with the BBC, Mike Love admitted to seeing Brian again, saying, "It wasn't as negative as people think." He expressed hope that they could collaborate musically again if circumstances allowed. Nonetheless, that wish never came true. In June 2025, Brian Wilson died while still under legal protection, his health failing and his memories fading. And this time, Mike Love did not keep quiet for as long as he had before. He spoke, using his real identity, his real name, and his real feelings. At 8 a.m. on June 12, 2025, a post appeared on Mike Love's official account with a black and white photo of him and Brian Wilson as children. The first line quoted a familiar line to fans: "Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal." After nearly 3 decades of being considered Brian's nemesis, Mike Love finally came out publicly with his personal feelings, just when there was no one left for him to refute or reconcile with. In a 94-second video posted by his communications team shortly afterward, Mike Love appears in a quiet space, wearing a dark suit, holding a 1965 photo of him and Brian in Capitol Studios. His voice is low and clear. "We didn't always agree, but what we created together is undeniable. I didn't just lose a colleague, I lost a brother." The quote was quickly retweeted across platforms, television, social media, and major newspapers. Love's statement was a stark contrast to the reserved, defensive demeanor he had displayed over the decades. In previous interviews, he had often resorted to evasive or counterattacking tactics when asked about Brian. This time, he paused, acknowledged the loss, and gave himself space to grieve. It was one of the rare times he spoke publicly without defending his own image or his role in the band's legacy. There was no mention of Mike Love in the statement, just Brian Wilson and what they had been together. The media response was almost immediate. Variety, The Guardian, and NPR all quoted Mike Love's statement in their tributes to Brian Wilson. Several veteran music journalists noted that it was an important break of silence at the right time, and perhaps the most honest thing Mike has said publicly about Brian in years. Some critics of Love also put aside their prejudices, saying that it was a necessary act to end an era with kindness. On social media, the reaction was polarized. Some longtime Brian Wilson fans were skeptical, saying Love's announcement came too late and lacked sincerity. One widely circulated comment read, "Brian was isolated in his later years, and Mike only spoke out when no one was questioning him anymore." But many others shared the opposite view, saying that at least Mike had not remained silent forever. His choice to appear on camera, not reading from a piece of paper, not beating around the bush, was an act of responsibility as the last living member of the founding team. Mike Love's presence at Brian Wilson's private funeral, held June 14th in Los Angeles, was also confirmed by a family representative. Although he did not speak at the ceremony, his attendance was highlighted by many news outlets as a sign of a final end to the feud. Other former members or collaborators of the Beach Boys were also present: Al Jardine, David Marks, Blondie Chaplin. There was no stage, no live music, only an old recording of "Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder" played during the service. It wasn't a reconciliation. There's no evidence that their relationship had been fully mended before Brian died. But the statement brought things back to the heart of the matter, not who was right, who was wrong, but who had the courage to look back, admit it, and finally break the silence when it was time. From the beach to the court. In the early 1960s, Mike Love and Brian Wilson were the inseparable pillars of the Beach Boys. They were not only cousins, but also the creative duo that shaped the group's signature sound. Brian was responsible for the mixing, arranging, and production, while Mike wrote and sang on nearly every major hit. The duo defined the California sound, a fusion of bright pop, ocean dreams, convertibles, youth, and Americanized freedom. But it was during those early years that the differences between the two began to develop into a rift that would last for decades. Brian quickly established himself as a composer without limits, while the rest of the group was content with a successful formula of short, catchy songs. Brian wanted to push the envelope. He spent hours in the studio, brought in orchestras, experimented with multi-layered recording techniques, and aimed to turn the Beach Boys into a serious artistic phenomenon. The 1966 album, Pet Sounds, was a testament to that vision. It was critically acclaimed and influenced even the Beatles, but was met with internal reservations, most notably expressed by Mike Love. Love worried that Pet Sounds was too complex and unlikely to appeal to the mass market. While he never publicly opposed its release, he made no secret of his view that the band was drifting away from what had made them successful. The simmering conflict came to a head when Brian launched the Smile Project, a hyper-ambitious album he described as a symphony to God. Mike felt the idea was unrealistic, too abstract, and would alienate the band. Ultimately, Smile was scrapped in 1967, leaving Brian in a prolonged mental crisis. After the failure of Smile, Brian gradually withdrew from the center stage, while Mike Love and the remaining members sought to keep the Beach Boys alive by returning to the familiar, easy-listening formula. The polarization between art and commerce became increasingly clear. In interviews, Love often emphasized the importance of keeping the band alive, while Brian became increasingly distant, barely performing and living a reclusive life for many years. By the early 1990s, the conflict had taken on a new form, legal and financial. Mike Love filed a lawsuit against Brian Wilson, seeking co-authorship of 35 songs that Love claimed he had written but had not been credited due to a decision by Brian's father, Murray Wilson. The case was a major one, attracting the attention of the entire entertainment industry. Love won the case, receiving more than $13 million in damages, and his name was officially added to the copyright records of many of the songs. Nevertheless, the lawsuit also severely damaged his image among fans. The media portrayed him as profiting from Brian's mental instability, although the lawsuit reflected a dispute over rights that had been going on since the beginning of his career. The tensions didn't stop there. After Carl Wilson's death in 1998, the group virtually disbanded. Mike Love registered the rights to perform as the Beach Boys and was granted exclusive rights to the brand for touring. Meanwhile, Brian Wilson performed under his own name, occasionally collaborating with Al Jardine or independent musicians. The existence of two Beach Boys was confusing to the public and created an irreparable rift within the surviving founders. In recent years, Mike Love has begun to soften his stance in interviews. He has spoken often of his childhood memories of Brian, insisting that things might have been different if it had been just the two of them and no third party involved. But history cannot be rewritten, and with Brian Wilson's death, their journey of collaboration and rivalry finally came to a close, not with a new chapter, but with the recognition that both success and tragedy were born from that relationship. Bass note afterward. Mike Love is entering his 84th year of life. He is the last surviving founding member of the Beach Boys. Dennis Wilson died in 1983, Carl Wilson in 1998, and in June 2025, Brian Wilson will be gone. With 60 years of history behind him, Love is not only dealing with the death of a loved one, but also with the memory of a complicated past where he was always at odds with Brian, both artistically and in the public eye. For decades, Mike Love felt he was being unfairly judged. He didn't deny Brian Wilson's genius, but he also felt that the media and fans had deliberately obscured the contributions of the others, especially his own role in writing lyrics, shaping the band's style, and keeping the band going. "I may not be a genius," Love once said, "but without me, a lot of the songs would never have been recorded because no one would have sung them or put them on stage." It wasn't a competition, but rather a long-standing resentment at being seen as a drag on Brian's vision rather than a creative partner. Looking back from where he is now, Love has reason to be proud. The Beach Boys still perform with him as their frontman. Millions of people across generations still listen to the recordings he sang lead. But his legacy is not felt in the same way as Brian's. One is called a transcendent artist, the other a copyright holder. One is remembered in nationally televised tributes. The other is routinely cast as the villain in documentaries and biographies. Mike Love understands that, and his response in recent years has been less strident. In interviews in 2023-2024, he began to talk more about what was lost than about what was disputed. He talked about family gatherings as kids, about the first time the brothers recorded together in the living room, about gigs where Brian didn't want to leave the house but ended up showing up anyway because Mike convinced him to. These are small details that don't change history, but they show that Mike Love's perspective has shifted toward recognition rather than confrontation. At 84, Mike Love is no longer the one who controls the narrative. After Brian's death, social media erupted with mixed emotions. Some called him the last man standing, only to redefine history in his own way. Others asked, is he trying to right a wrong, or is he simply keeping quiet because he doesn't want to be controversial? But what is clear is that Mike Love, even though he is still alive, is trapped in an image that others have created for him, and he has no desire to break it. He doesn't argue. He doesn't react. He doesn't argue. He writes a few lines, appears in a short video, and then retreats. Not everyone gets the chance to close such a long chapter. Mike Love, controversial as he is, broke his silence at a time when silence no longer made sense. At 84, he is not trying to rewrite history. He is simply reminding others that he is still here, the last witness to a lost legend. The legacy is divided. Brian Wilson's death not only closes a life, it also closes the final chapter in the complicated history of the Beach Boys. For more than 6 decades, the band has been a constant of change, division, and controversy. But now, with Mike Love as the sole surviving founder, the question of their musical legacy is no longer a matter of the past, it's a matter of the present and what happens next. Brian Wilson's legacy has long been recognized. He is considered one of the most influential composers of the 20th century. Albums like Pet Sounds and Smile were not just musical products, but creative statements that broke the boundaries of the pop industry. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, received countless awards, was the subject of a biopic and was the centerpiece of dozens of documentaries. His death was called the passing of a singular genius by the media. The public mourned him the way they mourned Lennon or Bowie. That reverence was undeniable. Mike Love's legacy, by contrast, has always been controversial. But being the lead singer on a string of iconic songs and the man who kept the Beach Boys brand going for decades, he has never been given the respect he deserves. In documentaries, he is often portrayed as a creative blocker for Brian. His struggles with copyright, his right to use the band's name, and his personal opinions, especially on politics, have all been interpreted negatively by the public. Although he continues to tour regularly with the new lineup of the Beach Boys, Love has never been treated as the guardian of the legacy, but rather as the one who is consuming it. If you find this video insightful and informative, please like to show your support, share it with others who love the Beach Boys, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more deep-rooted music stories. You can also leave a comment to share your thoughts on the journey that Brian Wilson and Mike Love went through. Thank you for watching until the end.